for that update from the ground there. Well, Ghazi Hamad is a Hamas official, and he says unless things change in the Gaza Strip, tensions with Israel will continue.
This is not the first round of confrontation. It will not be the last one. I think the seeds of the confrontation and conflict and clashes is still existed because of the occupation, because of the siege imposed in Gaza. So I have a great doubt that this will last for a long time unless we reach a complete ceasefire agreement, unless that siege is lift and blockade is lift, and people enjoy their freedom, their prosperity, opening the gates and the freedom of access. I think that we will witness another rounds of confrontation in Gaza. All Palestinian factions are committed to the understanding happened last night. But now I am talking about the official ceasefire agreement, which was managed by the Egyptian mediators. We expect that the Egyptians will continue and resume their talks because I said unless we have a complete ceasefire agreement, the clashes, the disputes, the tension will continue in Gaza. So I think Israel should understand that without resolving the problem, without lifting the siege and the blockade in Gaza, there will be more rounds of tension, more rounds of confrontation.
All right, joining us now here in the studio is Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. Good to have you with us. So, by all accounts of our correspondents there, calm is holding. Will this turn into a full-blown war again?
Well, there are three possible options for Prime Minister Netanyahu. One is to let things be and to simply rejoice at the gifts that he's been taken from President Trump and try for 2 weeks to live on that and to show the Israelis...
2 weeks because of the elections coming up.
Exactly, until the elections. And after that, he sees what his options are, if there are any military. The other one is that he does get involved more seriously in bombing various targets in Gaza and perhaps moving into assassinations and so on and so forth. But that will definitely lead to major retaliation on the part of the Palestinian resistance movement in Gaza, and that could risk his election chances. The third possible option is that he goes full-scale land invasion, and as many of his partners in the coalition would basically reoccupy Gaza, and as they would say, clean it up from Hamas and Jihad elements. I don't think any of these options is great. I think these are three bad options, but for the time being, if he can get away with just living off Trump for the next 2 weeks until the elections, he might do that. It's quite risky.
Well, I mean, Israel has tried all of those in the past. Ultimately, I think has tried all of those in the past. Ultimately, I think we still need to always remind ourselves of the basic problem here. Can there be peace and security at that border without an end to the occupation, without a situation where millions of human beings are living without the sort of citizenship and basic rights which you and I take for granted, and many of our viewers do?
Sami, I actually heard you asking this question because you're really looking for a serious answer.
Right.
And to be honest with you, the Israelis don't think so. I mean, I think the normal, rational, logical response would be, of course you have to end occupation. People cannot live under occupation forever. And when people live under occupation, then they are bound to resist, and then violence is bound to break, and those occupiers could not live in peace. The Israelis don't think that way. At least the Israeli right specifically doesn't think that way. The Israeli right thinks you can have your cake and eat it too. The Israeli right believes, on the basis of what Trump just did last night, that by force you can occupy territories and then you can annex those territories, and that the United States will support you. So let's just connect what happened yesterday with what could happen in Gaza and the West Bank, because this is very important. What President Trump told Prime Minister Netanyahu and his proclamation of the Golan being an Israeli territory is that now Prime Minister Netanyahu is bound to annex half of the West Bank.
Well, that's going to be my next question. Given what's already happened with recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital on the part of the US, the Golan Heights, is there any reason to believe that wouldn't extend to other now occupied territories?
No, I think it's definitely going to extend to other occupied territories. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition partners have always been saying that Area C, which makes up about 50-some% of the West Bank, will remain in Israeli hands, at least security-wise.
Will that resolve the problem, Marwan, though? Or just because you say, this is my territory, doesn't mean there's still a lot of people living there who don't want to be under Israeli sovereignty, right?
The Israeli mindset, especially on the right, goes as follows. There are many peoples around the world, like Kurds, like Basques, etc., who don't have states, and like Basques, etc., who don't have states, and the Palestinians are not exception. Palestinians, like many other people, do not need a state. They could have an expanded autonomy under Israeli security, and that the Palestinians, with Gulf money and the deal of the century, will be even living much better than many Arabs do if they accept Israeli diktats and Israeli control over historical Palestine, as well as, of course, as we know now, the Golan Heights. So Israeli right is convinced that no, you don't need permanent peace, you don't need to deoccupy Palestinian territories, and no, the Palestinian people don't need to be free in their own independent state in order for there to be peace and for there to be security for Israel. And that is the heart of the problem today.
Right, Marwan Bishara, thanks so much for coming in. Donald Trump signed the decree during a meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. Israel seized the strategically important area in 1967 and has occupied it ever since. The controversial move reverses decades of U.S. policy. The Golan Heights decision has been described by Syria as a blatant attack on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Damascus says it has a right to reclaim the territory. Russia warned the move would further deteriorate the situation in the region. Turkey called the decision unacceptable and plans to take action against the move. And Saudi Arabia says it's a violation of international law. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, is at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And James, I understand there was supposed to be a meeting anyway scheduled today to discuss Middle Eastern issues. How is this development going down?
They have and always have a monthly meeting to discuss the situation with regard to Israel and Palestine. That meeting happens to be taking place in about 15-20 minutes' time in the Security Council. So these two issues, the ongoing conflict in Gaza and the recognition by the US, the unilateral recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan, will be discussed when that meeting starts. Nikolai Mladenov, who is the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, the UN's man based in Jerusalem, will be giving his assessment of the current situation. Security Council members, I think, will be listening very carefully. They are deeply concerned about the situation in Gaza. Most of the Security Council, I think, privately very angry about the Trump decision on Golan. How far will they go publicly in what they say? I'm sure they will assert the fact that the Security Council has a clear position on Golan, and that the US declaration goes against Security Council resolutions and, for that matter, the UN Charter. Whether there'll be a great deal of criticism of President Trump is not clear. That's not the only thing that's happening in the next few minutes. On the way into that Security Council meeting, we can already see props being set up at the podium at the stakeout here at the Security Council, where ambassadors speak to reporters. In the next few moments, Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador, will be speaking to reporters there. We already know from press releases what he's going to say, and that's that Israel wants a strong condemnation of Hamas and its rocket that was fired. So that will certainly be the Israeli position. That's not the only person that's coming to that stakeout in the next half an hour or so, Sammy. We're also going to hear from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. His comments, we're told, will be mainly on the cyclone in southern Africa, but it's likely that he will probably get a question or two about the situation in Gaza and Golan. So quite a lot taking place here in the next hour. A lot of talk. Big question about whether there'll be any action, though.
All right, thanks so much. James Bayes there, our diplomatic editor. Plenty more still ahead on the News Hour, including...
It's time, Mr. Speaker, for Parliament to take control.
We ask what's next for the UK after MPs take charge of the Brexit agenda. Plus...
that One Nation officials basically sought to sell Australia's gun laws to the highest bidders to a foreign buyer.
Australia's Prime Minister reacts to an Al Jazeera investigation exposing covert efforts by America's biggest gun lobby to influence some politicians. In sport, a qualifier for the European Football Championships is marred by racist chanting. Andy will be here with that story. In an unprecedented move, MPs in Britain have voted to take control of the Brexit agenda from the government. Politicians say they want to make progress after the government was defeated by 329 votes to 302 on amendments to its Brexit agreement. On Wednesday, politicians will begin the process of deciding on a series of alternatives to Prime Minister Theresa May's deal, which has been rejected now twice. Right, Nadine Barber joins